IDW has been slowly imploding over the last, 6-7 years. They're losing tons of money. They've lost lots of licenses. They can't borrow money. And now we have more major changes. Their AIC is out. They lost Scott Dumbier recently, and now they have a new owner. And IDW is not the only company that's having problems. I guess Boom Studios is rumored to have lots of problems. Here to talk to me about this is my good friend Aaron Sparrow, former editor for the Boom Kids line, and has certainly done a lot of comic book work in his own right.
Indeed. I used to work for Boom back in 2009, 2010.
It's been wild seeing all this stuff happen to IDW because they were securely the number 4 company in American comic books for so long, relying on all those licenses. But then once they ruin their own reputation, it's been very difficult for them to stay above water.
I'm going to tell you what the death of almost every comic book company I've ever encountered or worked tangentially with has been. It's owners who either by design or by stumbling ass backwards into success have some measure of it, and then decide invariably that they are geniuses and that every idea they have, no matter how many times it's been tried before, no matter how many people they have from the industry that warn them that it's not going to work, or the potential pitfalls and why it's not worked in the past, they decide that they are geniuses and it's going to work for them, and they continue to move forward with it. That is what brings down every single one of these companies.
And there are lots of rumors that IDW had to do a massive overpay to keep their TMNT license, the only valuable license that they have left.
Mm-hmm. And lots of rumors in the wind that they are losing the Paramount license at the end of the year, and possibly another license, which I believe is the Ghostbusters license.
It's crazy. They used to do good Ghostbusters stuff too, but it's been a long time since they've even done anything with them. They have gone all in on Star Trek, but that's been really, really bad. Getting into the news that we do have, roughly 1 year after a company-wide reset, IDW Publishing, there's more changing in the company's structure and even ownership. The company's editor-in-chief, Jamie S. Rich, has left the role after just 12 months for a job with another company, with longtime colleague, former DC cohort, and IDW's co-publisher, Mark Doyle, stepping in to fill the position in his absence. Doyle isn't officially taking on the IDW editor-in-chief role. However, according to a company spokesperson, IDW plans to make an announcement soon about the editorial leadership in the long term. And it's pretty wild because originally, Mark Doyle, who was the Batman group editor when Tom King came aboard, he ended up getting Mark Doyle fired, was the co-publisher. The other publisher has stepped away to another position, and now he's the full-time publisher and editor-in-chief all at the same time. As we have this massive upheaval, they've lost so many senior executives in the past 12 months, and they lost Scott Dumbier, probably their best editor and most knowledgeable comic person in general.
There's only one thing to do, Wes. Make Heather Ontos editor-in-chief.
There's no way that's going to happen. You don't believe that she would get promoted, do you?
You don't. I mean, I didn't think that she'd get promoted to senior editor, and she somehow did. So, I mean, anything's possible in clown world.
I'm not going to say it can't happen because obviously it's comic books and weird stuff does happen. I hopefully they're not dumb enough to promote Heather Ontos to editor-in-chief.
Oh, don't underestimate how dumb they are.
But these are massive losses. It was a boon when they brought over Jamie Rich, who had been the Batman group editor, and Mark Doyle, who had worked on Batman before that, because they had all these big-time contacts at DC. They wanted to roll out all these creator-owned works, and none of it has worked out. What's the big name IDW has brought over? Jason Aaron to work on TMNT. That's the one person they got.
And that's a pretty tarnished brand at this point.
And he wasn't even a DC guy. He didn't work with Mark Doyle or Jamie Rich. Basically, hiring those guys never ended up pulling out anything in the end.
No, I mean, and if you were them, who would you want to bring over to IDW? I mean,
Scott Snyder, James Tynion. There'd be some big names.
Yeah, but those guys are doing their own thing. I mean, obviously, Scott Snyder's going back to, like a dog returning to his vomit by going back to DC to do some books that aren't going to move the needle. But James Tynion's got his own stuff going on. Like here's really the truth. Once you've had a taste of the independent life, once you've gone out and you've been able to do your own stuff and you've realized that, there is a market for comic books that are not part of Marvel and DC, and you won't have to deal with all the big bag of bullshit from a Tom Brevoort or a Jim Lee or, any of these incompetent people that are currently running these companies. Once you can go out and you can chart your own destiny, you don't want to go back. That's one of the reasons that Brevoort couldn't get anybody of high quality or high name recognition to come onto the X-Men books. Who wants that headache? Number one, who wants to deal with all the weirdo Krakoa fans, all 12 of them on the internet that are going to attack you nonstop and smear you constantly? Who wants to put up with that? And number two, who wants to have to, deal with the aftermath of Krakoa anyway? Who wants to deal with all the editorial edicts where even once you start writing a story, you've got to interrupt it every 3 months so that you can do some shitty crossover that isn't going to move the needle and it's just going to lower sales overall.
Well, and if you work for IDW, they have one property that you want to work on, TMNT. And who wants to do that? Because not only do you have to deal with all the oversight from IDW, you have to work with the licensor as well.
You have to get notes from the editorial staff at IDW, and then you have to get notes from the licensor. It's just a big headache, and for the amount of money that you're going to make doing it, what's the point?
I don't blame Jamie S. Rich for walking away after you see the shit show that is IDW. They had to cut down all their editorial staff. They got rid of all these people that actually knew what they were doing. What are you left with? A shit full of nothing. Some place where Heather Ontos is promoted up to your senior editor, is in charge of all your licensed products other than TMNT. It's basically just running Star Trek into the ground. Star Trek's not like a huge comic book franchise, but I think it could have been.
It could have been a decent franchise. It could have been, and it could have been satisfying to Star Trek fans.
I bet it was very, very difficult for Jamie S. Rich as editor-in-chief and then Mark Doyle as co-publisher. Once you start realizing there's just not a whole lot of reason to bring people into the fold. Why do you want to create creator-owned work for IDW when they're going to be co-owners of the creators, when you could do it on crowdfunding, when you do it for Image Comics where you have full ownership and all that stuff? And basically just nobody came out, and basically everything is falling apart. But we've been seeing this for so long. They've lost so much money. When they only lose like $1.5 million, it's considered a success.
Right? It's hey, we only lost $2 million this year. That's a vast improvement. And yeah, it is. I mean, it's better than losing $6 million. But at the end of the day, you still lost $2 million in your, you didn't make anything. You're just costing people money. And you've got one license that you don't own that eventually you're not going to be able to afford. And you're paying people that don't know what they're doing. You've promoted people who don't know what they're doing, who can't move the needle, who actually have an adversarial relationship with your customer base. How do you expect to survive? I can't believe that IDW is still going. That company has been on life support for so long.
And I don't know if you noticed this, but they are going to go so hard in the paint on TMNT now because they literally have to, just with the amount of money they're likely paying for the license, that we're going to end up with 6 to 8 IDW TMNT comic books going at all times.
Which is not sustainable.
There have been other changes. All of this happens after IDW CEO Davide Jonas has taken over majority control of the company from his father, Howard Jonas, who became majority owner in 2007. Howard Jonas remains the company's chairman of the board. Following this, IDW has gone public with ambitions to raise $2.3 million by what's called a private placement offering, in order to obtain money, in order to continue the company's licensing activities, to maintain reserves and enable the company to act opportunistically and work for capital in general corporate purposes. Because they can't actually borrow money from banks because their credit score is so low. They actually went out there and tried to become publicly traded and all that stuff. They had to pull all that back within a matter of months. And they're likely just trying to fund their TMNT license at this point.
Yeah, but they're never going to be able to get out of debt. They're never going to be able to make enough money to get themselves out of the hole. So it's just a holding action against the inevitable. I don't know what the long-term plan is. I don't know. There's nothing there worth buying. I had friends who looked into IDW a few years ago into buying it, and they said that the amount of debt that they have versus the assets is just wildly out of balance. You're getting nothing there. You're essentially buying crippling debt because there's nothing else to offset it.
Several years ago, all that debt was kind of on the books as debt to companies and all that kind of stuff and banks or whatever. They have managed to kind of clean that out to where it looks like they're debt free, but really they're just in debt to the owner of the company, Howard Jonas, and his family now. Mm-hmm. And that's why he was taking pieces of the company and taking control of it and then selling it off to pay himself back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that he could get back some of this terrible, terrible investment. Look, IDW, they got up their own ass. They decided that they were going to be a movie studio. Nobody wanted to actually give them money for their projects. So they were like, well, we'll go ahead and we'll take all the money out of our company and we'll spend it on making our projects ourselves. And we'll do Winona Earp. and that'll catch on, and then everybody will want to come and invest in IDW properties for Netflix and for television and for movies. And none of that ever happened. All they did was dump a bunch of money into Winona Earp.
Supposedly, you're going to get a Winona Earp original movie on Tubi. Tubi's a free platform. I'm imagining they're not giving a whole lot of money over here to IDW.
And maybe somebody will watch it. I don't know. Maybe the 100,000 people.
Free. You don't have to pay for it.
The 100,000 people that watched Winona Earp to begin with.
And you're just seeing the company crumble. And, I kind of feel bad for Mark Doyle. I don't think what happened to him at the hands of Tom King was fair. And I was kind of rooting for him that maybe he'd be able to turn IDW around. But I just think it's fallen to such a degree that it might not be able to be salvageable at this point, because there is just such an enormous amount of debt that even if you go away from the entertainment stuff and you're not concentrating on TV shows and movies, they garnered so much debt going into there that comic books will never get them out of it.
Yeah, IDW basically at this point is like going to a friend's house and they've got like a 20-year-old dog that comes into the room and you're like, oh, there he is. He's still around, huh? Hey, buddy. You got to pretend like it looks great. But really, it should have been put down a few years ago. That's IDW at this point.
They are not the only indie comic book publisher that's been having troubles. A few years ago, it looked like Boom might overtake them as the permanent number 4 publisher. They had, House of Slaughter. They had Something Is Killing the Children. They had a pretty decent-sized hit from Al Ewing. And everything was looking up Boom Studios, but apparently that was not to be. It has not lasted. Boom Studios president of publishing and marketing, Philip Sablik, is leaving the company for a new opportunity. A Boom spokesperson confirmed. Sablik has been at Boom for 12 years. He joined Boom Studios as vice president of publishing and marketing in 2012. Sablik began his career in comics in the double aughts with 6 years at Diamond Comic Distributors. Boom has had an unconventional management structure since the departure of CEO Ross Ritchie in 2021, leaving Sablik, President, Development Stephen Christie, Editor-in-Chief Matt Gagnon, and CFO currently Jennifer Harnan in charge, with no new CEO named. There's no news yet as what leadership of the company will look like post-Sablik. And there are rumors out there that there are more layoffs probably in the future of Boom, right?
I'm sure there are. I actually I haven't been paying attention to Boom in the longest time. I had no idea that Ross was out of there. I wonder if they forced him out.
He left 3 years ago.
I wonder
He's the guy that's doing isn't he the one that doing Distillery?
No, that's Chip Mosher.
Oh.
That's their marketing guy. That's their former marketing guy, and he was out of there.
The other dumbass from Boom.
It's wow. Boom is that's crazy. I mean, I'm not surprised that eventually they found a way to, I would have to guess that maybe they pushed Ross out, because otherwise, that whole company was just built around his desire to be a film producer and to get in good with a studio. The problem is that, when you had guys like Stephen Christie, who were, fairly connected in Hollywood because he was part of Archaea, Philip Sablik, you had those guys come in and they had some connections. The problem with getting any Hollywood deal done was eventually Ross would want to be in the room and screw it up. I remember, so when Pixar was very unhappy with Boom because because someone actually said on a call where Pixar was pushing back against some things that they didn't want published, because the editor-in-chief, Matt Gagnon, had pushed me to deliver a book on time, to basically have our artist, Clint Helinski, draw a book in 2 weeks. And I told him, Clint can do it in 2 weeks, but the quality will be so bad because you have rushed him that Pixar will reject it. And then we will have to go back to the drawing board and start over. And so you will miss your schedule anyway. So we should just let Clint draw the book normally. We'll only lose 2 weeks because he'll have it done in a month instead of losing 6 to 8 weeks because you want to push for this. He pushed for it anyway. Pixar rejected it. We had to get on a call because Pixar was so unhappy with the quality of the book. And it wasn't Clint's fault. Clint would have delivered a good book had he, been given the time to do so. But on the call, somebody said to Pixar, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Ross. But he said, nobody is going to care about the quality of this book anyway. He basically told old school Pixar, and this is while John Lasseter was still there, and they still had creative people that, were really, really good, and everybody at Pixar was a true believer. They told Pixar, nobody's going to care. And Pixar immediately went, well, if nobody cares, then why are we doing this? and got very adversarial with Boom. So to Jesse Post, our liaison at Disney, to his credit, he said, listen, I want to get you in a room with Pixar. He goes, you speak their language. You want the books to be quality. I know that they'll be, they'll work with you. They'll get you, you'll get them, and it'll work out. So he set up this meeting. Ross and Matt insisted on going. I still managed to save it. I managed to save the business, but then Boom fired me like a week later. And then Pixar apparently was sent over a message that said, well, obviously, we're all very disappointed with your decision. This is what I was told by Disney. And later I ran into one of the guys from Pixar who I had the meeting with and at San Diego Comic-Con. This is like maybe a month and a half later. And he was like, what happened? And I kind of told him the story from my perspective. And he goes, we're pulling a license. He said, we were only interested in working with you because you got it. He goes, the other two guys that came along, one of them was a used car salesman, and the other one, it was obvious, had never seen a single Pixar property in his life. He goes, we immediately dismissed those two. And he goes, and we were interested in working with you, so we're pulling the license. So that was the end of that. That's where they lost the Pixar license. So I'm not surprised that Ross is gone, because in my opinion, he probably screwed up every deal that they might have had on the table.
He was the used car salesman?
Yep.
He got to be. He's just full of it.
Mm-hmm. Just going in there and, like doing his big bag of bullshit, doing the Hollywood puffery thing, which I'm sure, anytime he went into a studio, I'm sure that's exactly what happened, going in there with his big tall tales and just turning off everybody in the room.
And it kind of sucks because there is a vacuum. There's a place for an independent comic book company wants to take a few chances, but really focusing on quality, not worrying about Hollywood. Just let's make the best stories possible to see what happens, to kind of fill a major void. Obviously, you still have Image there, but IDW is not very good. Dark Horse lost a lot of their cool licenses. They're not as hot right now. Boom Studios is kind of struggling. And there is an area that could be exploited with really good comic books, and nobody's doing it.
No, nobody's doing it. Even Dark Horse, who used to be the kind of the leader, they had more. They were the independent comic book company that had more movies optioned and more stuff go to the silver screen than any other company out there. And even them, like, what do they have left right now? I mean, yeah, they got bought up by Endeavor, but I think Endeavor took a write down on them this last year.
I think they're trying to sell it off now.
Comic books are in rough shape. They're in really rough shape, despite what Heidi McDonald will try to tell you. When she's taking guys that are shutting their dream down on the last day, when she's taking them hostage and making them parrot what she wants them to say into the into the mic so that she can use it in her article. Comics are in trouble. The big two it's always been a situation where the success of Marvel is the success of the industry. Marvel's the tide the rising tide that raises all ships. And if Marvel's doing well, everybody's doing well. Marvel's doing terribly creatively. DC, non-entity under Jim Lee. Just terrible creative. Guy's just asleep at the wheel, doesn't care, letting the ship run aground. With those two big players out, comic shops struggling, not wanting to carry new books. Image, they don't really own anything. They're just really an imprint, and you can pay them to publish your book and put it in their section of the catalog. But you're not going to make a lot of money on it, and then any deal that you get is going to be separate anyway. So there's just not a lot out there. There is room for a company to come in and set the world on fire, but there just may not be enough of an industry left for anybody to notice.
Well, I think there's too many people that want to be involved with comic books because they want to be involved with movies or television, and not enough people with power that want to be involved with comic books.
Mm-hmm. I want to do comic books. I've always wanted to do comic books. It's one of the reasons that I'm doing Kneel Before Doomface, is because I'm like, you know what? I want to do my own comic book. I'm tired of working on franchise properties. I'm trying to have to take notes from idiots. I'm tired of having to, listen to people who don't know what they're talking about. I'm tired of being involved with blowhard publishers that, 1 week they want to do something else, but they're so mercurial that the next week they want to do something else entirely different, so that you can never really get any momentum. You can't maintain any momentum. You can't make a plan because, they're just dropping the ball left and right because they stumbled, like I said, ass backwards into some success and now think that every idea they have is genius, even though every idea they've had since loses money, even though they were warned. I'm tired of it. I just want to make comic books. I want to tell stories. I want to have a good time. I want to entertain people. If somebody comes along and they want to make a Kneel Before Doomface animated series, I'm certainly game. But you know what I'm going to want in order for that to happen? I'm going to want creative control over it. And if I don't have it, I don't need it. I want to make comic books. I want to dance with who brought me.
The last comic book company I can think of that was really owned and operated by big-time comic book fans was really Valiant under Dinesh Shamdasani. And obviously that was a passion project for him and Warren Simmons. They were doing all this great stuff. They get a minority investor in there and DMG Entertainment who says, hey, we want the option to be able to buy you out. All of a sudden they get signed up. We're going to get a Bloodshot movie. We're going to get a Harbinger TV show. They buy them out. Nobody there cares about comic books anymore. And guess what happens to Valiant Comics? No longer any fans. Everything just dries up and everybody walked away because it's clear that nobody gave a shit. It just sucks to see it happen so many times to where that Hollywood greed and that Hollywood eye and wanting to be a part of something, you know, I guess on television and movies just always ends up trumping this. And anytime there's anything hot, some Hollywood guy comes in and buys it up, or somebody with Hollywood ambition buys it up, hoping to get a foot into Hollywood itself and just walk away from comic books.
Mm-hmm. And then they make a movie like Bloodshot. And then that does so poorly. They're like, well, we need to reinvent ourselves. Let's go back to comics. Who do we got that can launch a comic book, relaunch our comic book company to success? Heather Antos.
Well, she's about to be 2 for 2 on destroying independent comic book companies.
That's true. Hey, let's
and Boom will hire and she'll be 3 for 3.
Who will be the third? Yeah, it'll be Boom, right?
Probably. I do want to say thank you very much to Aaron for joining me today, really giving some insight from his experience working in the smaller publishers, that kind of indie space. Really appreciate that. If you like what Aaron and I are throwing down here and the vibe that we've got a big old podcast called The Geek Fix over on Thinking Critical Patreon. If you haven't checked that out, there's a free trial right now. We got months and months of archives that you can also download as well. There's a link to the Patreon in the video description.